welcome to this episode of Figuring It Out at the Figure Studio. Today we're here with Nandini of Kali Ma Triple Goddess Tarot, and we're here talking about this business that brings spirituality and healing to our community and beyond. We're so excited to learn exactly about how you figured it out. So Nandini, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and exactly what your business is?
So my business is a healing business. It's a healing practice. It's really just me on my journey of healing, like whatever I'm learning to bring it to my communities. And I say communities because I feel like I'm kind of juggling like a lot of different worlds as a person of the diaspora, Indo-Caribbean, then also being raised in Brooklyn, kind of away from everyone. And then also just being queer and experiencing my communities in that space. So I'm trying to like figure out how I'm healing all those aspects of myself, and then wanting to open that space to others. So my practice is mostly about that. I offer Reiki. Reiki healing is like a Japanese form of healing, but I felt guided to it mostly because it was what was accessible to me. Like the New Age scene, I think, is what opened me up to it, which is I have a lot of feelings around that because the practices are inherently black and brown practices, and I think that some of us, especially people who have been colonized, are like we're getting our divine heritage like through little ways, and there are people who have already capitalized on that, so we're kind of learning our practices from them. Very frustrating. But once I learned Reiki, the process of learning it is that they're attuning you to these symbols, these really ancient symbols, and they're opening up your spiritual self and your aura, and they're lifting your vibration, right? So when they did that, my first teacher was actually like a white person, and they're
Brooklyn, can I assume that? Yeah.
Yes, they're from Montana.
Okay, wow.
And you know, to be honest, like I love her, and I respected like what she was offering, but in our interactions, we eventually had to stop talking. I mean, she blocked me and everything because when she got into my spirit, she met Kali, and it scared her, and she stopped wanting to work with me because I think it worried her, and she wasn't used to that energy, you know? And it was really symbolic for the fear that white people had meeting black and brown people, and like our practices and our languages and our flavor, you know?
Right.
And then they were just like, what is this? Well, we should just not do this, you know, instead of being like, maybe I should learn something. And then I prayed so hard to find my other teacher to finish my training. And the woman that I met, she's Puerto Rican and Indo-Caribbean, Guyanese, and she was a Durga devotee and worked with the Orishas, so which is like from the Ifa traditions of West Africa. So her practice was like so imbued with the energy that I was working with, and I was lucky because she took me to that level, you know. I started with tarot readings and like reading people's energy, because it was like my tool for using what I already had inside of me. And the same thing with Reiki. Once I got imbued with Reiki and they opened up that energy, like I realized it was just Shakti, and I was already working with it. So it was just like a tap on the back and a reminder that, oh, you need all these things. You feel like you need all these things, but you know, you just need to train yourself with the practices you already have inside. And then I also teach meditation. I do guided meditation, and I teach people about the Bija mantras and like just small, like very simple mantras that like a lot of Hindu kids are raised with or around. But that people don't have the access to, or have forgotten, or aren't connected to in the same way anymore. And I'm opening up that in myself. So once I do that, I start to share it. And along the way, I meet and find teachers who facilitate more learning for me, and then I keep sharing. So it's like kind of like a, you know, assembly line, or sort of like taking something, seeing it, using it, and then passing it forward.
Yeah, you're facilitating these learning experiences for the rest of your community. So I want to delve into each of these practices a little bit more to just give our listeners a better understanding of exactly what is the experience of Reiki healing, what is the experience of a tarot reading, that type of thing. So let's start with Reiki. So can you just describe exactly what the experience of Reiki healing is? So I know you mentioned a little bit of the heritage of Reiki, but you know, I am interested in getting a Reiki healing experience. What is that like for me, quite literally and physically?
So Reiki, again, it's a Japanese form of healing, and it is a really ancient system that didn't have a really big structure to it. It was just sort of something you would find in communities and families. Like they were just healing each other and healing your energy through like moving the energy in the body. And it was, you become attuned to it. So basically your whole life facilitates the practice. But then Ishui Shiki Ryoho, which is the master who created the system, he taught it to two people. One person who was his main student, and then a woman who came to Hawaii. Her name was Hawaii Takata, or Takato. I'm not exactly sure of that, but she's the one who brought it to the West and like taught everyone here how we have Reiki. And basically what happens in Reiki is that, you know, you're moving energy in people's bodies and spirit to unblock stuff for them. And for everyone, Reiki is different. Like some people come in because they just need some relaxation, you know? And I think that's the way that it's sort of like sold as this relaxation thing. But it doesn't feel that way for me. It feels like a way for us to deepen our connection to ourselves and to the world around us. And it also facilitates like spiritual growth. And I think what Reiki really does in my practice is that it's opening up people to their own power, you know? And I think we set our intentions, like Reiki is just energy movement, and then the person who does it and the person who comes in are the people who make it what it is.
Right.
You know?
So what, in your experience of becoming, are you a Reiki master? Is that the appropriate term for that?
Yes, I'm a Reiki master.
Okay. So in your experience of becoming a Reiki master, what were some of the things that you had to learn or go through?
So it's 3 attunements, and then you become a master and then a master teacher. And I'm a master teacher. So there's, in the first attunement, basically you get one symbol and it gets placed in your aura. You go through a training with your teacher, and you'll find each other, I think, in sort of a cosmic way, just by signs and synchronicities. And they just sort of like, when I was reading tarot for my teacher, not realizing, my first teacher, that she was going to be my teacher. And then one day being like, I'm really feeling like I need to move on and learn Reiki. And she's like, oh, I do that. I'm a teacher. And I was like, oh, okay. But basically you're lifting your vibration. So after your first attunement, you're like, at first I think you feel kind of like high and you're excited and you're like, wow, I'm like a goddess, I'm a god, like I can do things. And you start to feel things, like even a plant or another person sitting next to you. It's double-sided, because like you might feel someone's joy, but then you're also like dragged by their heaviness, you know, like sometimes maybe they're feeling a lot and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. Is this mine? Is this yours? It's basically bringing you to the awareness of subtle energy. But then what happens is that you have to learn about yourself and you have to go through training. So it kind of brings you into a more mindful practice. And if you don't facilitate that, a lot of people get attuned and then just drop it, you know, because it can be a lot to start to pay attention to every little thing that you're doing in your day-to-day and start to curate your life in a way that's healthy for you, because maybe your circumstances don't allow for that. So by the time you're moving on to Reiki 2, you have to have a practice. Like you have to be meditating, doing Reiki on yourself, and connecting with yourself, because Reiki 1 is about you. Okay. You know, you're not really a practitioner yet. Once you get into the second part, you're a practitioner, and then you can charge people for it and work with others and work with plants and animals. And you know, when you're Reiki 1, you can like Reiki anything though. You can Reiki your pillow, you can Reiki your food, like all those things, which is encouraged because it teaches you that like everything can be a vessel of energy. Yeah. And so if you Reiki your pillow, say it sounds a little silly, but if you Reiki your pillow and then you go to sleep, your dreams might be more pleasant, or you know, you might not be laying on the energy that like you bawled your eyes out on earlier, you know? Yeah. So there's that aspect of it. And then when you get into mastership, it's for everyone it's different. You just have to like be aware of yourself, you know, when you're ready to be attuned into the last 2 attunements, your guides sort of start leading you further into that, because you have to be prepped for it and really just shoot your energy up, and you really don't want it usually to be that high. Like you want to kind of come back and not be in that full energy, because it can really lift you and put a lot of responsibility for how you act. So in that sense, it's very challenging. And then the rest of your practice is you stabilizing and learning about it. So the attunements happen over a couple of years, I would say, to get to a master. Some people do it less than that. For me, it was like within 1 year I did 1 and 2, and then sort of a year and a half I was a master. So
awesome.
that's because I had tons of other practices facilitating it.
Yeah. So you touched on this a little bit, especially going through Reiki 1, where you just become so much more attuned to all of these energies around you coming from different beings or properties, whatever it may be. I can imagine, especially as you go into working with other people and things, that it might become a little stressful dealing with especially negative energies or energies that might weigh you down. Can you talk about what was it like actually working towards stabilizing, working with those energies for yourself? Like, did you feel like you needed to almost protect your energy and your well-being in those ways?
Yeah, I think with like any spiritual practice, and even if you're just an empath or a sensitive person, and you can just tell that by how you feel around others and needing a lot of alone time and things like that, you always need protection. Like, everyone needs it. But when you're doing energy work, you need like a little extra of it because you're doing it more of that. And I think part of it has been training for me, so I'm like becoming like a spiritual warrior in a sense, because it's teaching me how to be resilient, and to be less afraid. And the closer that I got with my mother deity, Kali, like the more I'm surrendering to her doing that protection work, and the less I'm worrying about the practices. So when I first started, it was about visualizations, meditation, pranayam that does protection work for you, and a lot of those things you can find in like literally like psychic protection books written by like white ladies all over America that are just taking from our ancient like tantric practices and like kind of, I don't want to say watering it down, but like making it accessible to America and to Western cultures. So kind of some of those practices were part of my work, and then my guides sort of come in and they lead me, like I said, into people's spaces, into teachers, and bring people in that know the real deal, and then just give me that transmission. And then I started working with, I got initiated recently into Kundalini Kriya Yoga, and that really helps to clear all that stuff out. So everything that you're doing with Reiki, it kind of like transmutes that and your own karma and things like that. But with Kali, I feel like when I work with her, she just sort of steps in a lot of times when it's too heavy, and she just does it for me. And I've been learning more and more about that, whereas that's also a lesson for me. Like, naturally, like, I'm a Virgo, so, we get that thing in, like, memes about being mom friend. And I naturally had this thing where I'm like, I have to be hyper-focused all the time on everyone's well-being, Ever since I was little, I was like a small grandma. Like, so I definitely had that energy already when I was little. Like, and I realized that I was taking on too much from doing that. Like, it was just in me to be that way, but it wasn't necessary to always be that way. And so I'm learning to surrender to her protection, which means that, like, I'm learning about her energy. I'm learning about what that means to be protected. And sometimes that means literally having discernment and boundaries. Like, just because I'm learning how some of it's training and some of it's saying no. Like, I don't want to work with this person, and I don't have to go that far into your spirit, And I'm also realizing that not everyone does work the way that I did. Like, when I started doing Reiki, I was like blasting people open and like working really hard and being like taking them to like next levels where they could like start on a deep yogic practice. And these are people that are like not meditating, they're not doing all that stuff. So it's like for them, it's like, oh yeah, wow, this is intense, and then it goes away and it goes flat. And I was like, wow, I don't have to do all that because not everybody wants that.
Right. How do you gauge what people might want, or how far you should go when you're working with someone?
I think that it's case by case. Sometimes I just feel it, and I'm becoming more attuned to it because this kind of healing work isn't talked about openly. We don't have that open discussion. I mean, we are having it now, thank God. So we can finally start to collectively say, like, is this normal? Is this cool? Like, how do you do this? And that I'm learning as I go. There are obviously like texts that help guide us in here or there. But I mean, I'm just learning as I go, to be honest.
Awesome. So you definitely touched on this, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into your thoughts on new age spirituality and new age healing services being offered as businesses, especially in places like New York. And who's actually offering them. I think sometimes, and this is pulling from my own experience and what I see in the world, I think sometimes when those types of services are offered by white people, that they're more accepted, that they're less scary, that they don't seem as, like potentially like a scary type of spirituality that might be aligned with things that are taboo. Like voodoo comes to mind, but obviously like it has to do with the color of the people in which those traditions come from. Can you talk a little bit about what it means for you to have your own business as a person of color in a space where so many people are having success capitalizing on these traditions from communities of color?
Wow, that's like most of what I talk about. It's like my whole experience in doing this has been really about unpacking that and thinking about that. So thank you for asking and bringing that up. I think that it's like I've been thinking a lot about demonization and documentation as like things that we work with, right, collectively as people of color. And then obviously we have like colorism within people of color, and then the gradation and hierarchies of practices even within like one culture and heritage, right? So there's a lot to unpack there on all the fronts, especially since, my family's from Guyana, and so there's like, we're in South America, it is Caribbean, then there's like Afro and Indo-Caribbean people, and no one can say that all those practices aren't mixing, right? Like that is real. Like you're not like not everyone's Brahmin. Like you need to relax. Like that's not a thing. We are collectively merging, and I think it was guided to be that way. Even the fact that that happened in such a negative way, yes, but like in a way we're connecting in that space to figure this out. And then we moved a lot of us to New York, another hub of all those cultures and more. Right? So what I've been thinking about in terms of like businesses and people capitalizing, especially white people, is that there's this sort of like, with colonialism, there was like this sort of bagging up of all of our cultures and tools. And they have like these sacks full of our tools, and they're like, you can't use this because when you use it, it's evil and it's bad. And this plant just touched me. They're like, yeah, you're right. They're like, talk, yeah, talk. I was like, I really think about it. It's like, I feel like even in my own family, like nobody worshipped Kali, when I was growing up. And just now how that's part of my life, like no one said no to it, but as it's happening, it's really the fears around it and like people's own, like my dad, he always goes like, I'll be like, have you ever seen Kali in her more fearsome self, right? And he's like, no, she always comes to me very nice. And I was like, yeah, okay, because you haven't seen her. Like, and so there's this sense of like wanting to tone stuff down that even we carry, right? Toning things down, making it quieter, hiding it, muting it, putting it away, right? And that we're doing that across the board, even to each other, because of colonialism and the violence enacted on us. We're traumatized, We don't want to show things that we were told we shouldn't through violence, And part of that then got co-opted by white people and used to make money. And it's generations after the actual act, right? So they're like, what? I'm a peaceful person. I do yoga. I would never do that, And it's like, okay, yeah, but like your ancestors did. Are you unpacking that? Are you using your privilege in your space? And when you teach yoga, like, are you naming your teachers, your brown teachers, the text in which you got it, the gurus in which taught those things? Or are you just going straight into it and making an Instagram page of you doing like headstands? Like, you know what I mean? And the fact that it's so surrounded around like Pilates and being skinny, and like that there's so much like, fat phobia and like body, like there's like this sort of stripping away the bodies that created the practices, Or even just I saw recently a video of this white woman, like it was like an ad on Instagram, it was so well done, and it's like this white woman doing like Afro beats, African dance. And I was just like, what? Like this is so wild to me, like that you can just do this and not feel aware after all of your spiritual practice. All of the sensitivity that you're gaining from your practices, you don't feel people, you don't feel the discomfort, what is happening in that moment of silence when you're in meditation? Are you not seeing that?
Right.
It's so confusing. And so when I say documentation, right, so that's like at the demonization part. It's like, this is demonic when you do it. When I do it, it's chill. And then there's like,
twice as much.
yeah, and you should pay me for it. So you should pay me to learn your own practices. But then there's this like documentation, right? And documentation we see like all across the board, right? It's for immigrants, right? It's for like if you want to be respected in your field from another country. There are people who come from other countries where they're doctors, and here they're like not doing that job, you know? And they're respected for their knowledge, for all the studying they did. It just leaves.
Right.
And so documentation in America and like, you know, places where where we're informed by colonization, and then we have this documentation thing. It's like, that's how white people are doing it. They're like, you're gonna have to be a certified yoga teacher. We're gonna round up a bunch of white people, go to Guatemala, get trained. That's a real thing. I hear about it all the time. I had a friend who was like, they're like a Latinx person who's white passing, but they were raised in the hood with me in Bushwick, and they got invited to go to Mexico to do a yoga training. And they said no because of all the things that we're hearing about, all the things that we know are happening at the border. And then a bunch of white people are going to happily go with their yoga mats to learn a practice from another part of the world in Mexico with all that.
Right.
And train each other, only white people. So in that sense, it's like there's a lot of, in terms of making a living or being even recognized. Because for me, it's not necessarily just making a living, because that's not realistic for me as a person of color. What I am trying to do is reclaim our space, you know, and as like a light-skinned brown person, I think that using that privilege into some white spaces is what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they do feel like a sense of safety, unfortunately, to like allow me into certain spaces, and I think that that's what I want to do, is like reclaim space and then invite everyone in there, you know?
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I do kind of want to just put this out there that it's not necessarily the issue that someone white is doing yoga and practicing it and teaching it, but it's the lack of awareness, first of all, and also lack of inclusivity when they are practicing and sharing that knowledge. Yeah, I mean, would you agree with that, or do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that yoga is for everyone. Like, the practices of Tantra and the way that they disperse into the world is really powerful, and there are people all over. There are African traditions that include yoga, and even there are hieroglyphs that you see of people doing yoga. So yoga is universal, but the thing is that when you're coming from the side of the oppressor and you're using it as a way to capitalize and to make yourself the authority on, that's frustrating. And it's not even, for me, it's not even just inclusivity, but it's about centeredness. Like, are we centering POC, or are we just including us? Like, no, I don't want to be included. Like, if it's a practice from it's in my divine heritage, then I want to be centered, you know? And I think that even for Kali worship, like, I talk about it a lot and I make such a big deal about it, but it's because people are okay with me talking about it. You know, Madrasi people talking about that don't get the same like love and support. Mm-hmm. You know, there's this sort of like pullback even from our own people about that, which is unfortunate, because that they are the carriers of something really ancient that we all deserve to reclaim. Like, we can connect to. Like, there are people who, no matter what, have held on to like really sacred things, and us connecting to them, like we get to share in that ancient aspect of ourselves, that pre-colonialist aspect of ourselves.
Definitely. And that's something that you can't learn. That's not something that you can read a book and figure out how to do. So this is a great segue, because I do want to ask more about Kali and your relationship with her, and I just kind of want to open it up how did you come to even begin? What was the beginning point of your relationship with Kali and understanding this sense of spirituality with her?
My beginning of Kali was like rock and roll. Like, you know, it sounds funny, but like rock and roll, like
she's a badass.
Yeah, she's a badass. She's like the most rock and roll goddess. Like, and she teaches me that even now. Like, I feel a lot of like, as I get deeper into my practice with her and like learning about her, I have a lot of vulnerability and fear around like how I'm reacting to her practice, and she teaches me that like there was a time that I was really free and I was going to all these shows and I was going to like metal shows and punk shows, and that she was there with me and that she interacts in those spaces, and she teaches me so much about that when she's with you, like it's not when you start noticing her, is that she's already been noticing you like way before that. You know, which reminds me of my mom always as a teenager being like, you don't think I know you? Like, I raised you. I saw you before you could see yourself. Like, you know, and it's true, she did. She saw a lot of my mannerisms and the way that I was and my predisposition and like what I was going towards in my life a lot of times, you know? And Kali does that. My practice and my connection with her, you know, I think that I really first started just seeing her in images, and that's how she attracted me. She, as she is like just she works with what you're doing, you know. She comes into the space in which you are and she brings you further and further. And for me it was aesthetic, like the way that she looked, she represented like the feminist, the wildness, you know. And I was just like trying to break free of like my family and like cultural restriction and being like, I'm different, I don't know how yet, but I am. And like Holly was like, yeah, you are, let's do this, you know. And it started with just wearing like a shirt with her image on it and being like, this is so cool, but never being told anything about her really. And then reading about her, and then it became like sort of an intellectual thing. She knows that I'm not going to go straight to spirit. At that time I wasn't a practicing Hindu, like I had left a lot. My family is like Hindu, Muslim, and Christian, just to be fair on that. But I was raised Hindu, which I have a lot of interesting feelings about. But the thing is that as my life sort of got really intense once I exited like my family's home and I went away to college, and then like I had partners that I lived with, which is like not a thing. You know, my parents, they are brave, like they are flexible on levels that I don't give them enough credit for the lifestyle that I've had, because in order for me to do the work that I do now, Kali took me through all the depths of my karma and showed me life in ways where I dealt with a lot of really difficult things in this life, like a lot of abuse and homelessness and a spectrum of things that even, you know, my family doesn't know probably until now. Now they're gonna know. Surprise, I had a really hard life. But like, you didn't know anything about it. But I think that they could feel that I was going through something and I had pulled away from them. And this sort of independentness that comes with Kali and Kali worship. Everyone has their own way of doing that. I can't speak on what temples are doing and like how Madrasi people are connecting to Kali, because that is a sacred, you know, like I said, divine heritage. For me, it was like, I was like an orphan of hers, I felt like, and she just like plucked me into this family and was like, you know, you're different, you feel, you know, but like you actually belong. You belong to this bigger voice of change in the world, and you're gonna be a part of that somehow. But in order for you to do that, you have to start by lifting yourself out of the place that you're comfortable, and it's gonna be hard. And she's the only one who can handle when your life gets that hard. I feel like she's like the only goddess I feel like that doesn't shame you for when you go into those dark spaces and you're exploring it. And as my practice with her started, really was like, I think in 2011, 2012, when everyone was like, aliens are coming. And, you know, people were like freaking out, they're like, it's the end of the world, like, aliens are gonna come, they're real. That was when Kali came. So I was like, maybe something is true about this. She came and she told me her mantra, and she told me to start speaking it. And at the time I was drinking a lot, but she still could come through. Like, she came through first in a vision. I had my eyes closed and I saw, it was in my room, the light was on, and I just saw someone like walk past my eyes, and I got like chills. I was like, this is wrong. Like, you know, terrified. I got so scared. And she's like, it's just me, and this is my mantra, and I'll say it. And so I started speaking her mantra in certain places, and people that were in the room, like that I was having a hard time with, would literally like get up and leave. They would just like walk out like zombies. And I was like, whoa, like what is this, you know? And she taught me about dance. She told me that like when you're dancing, you're invoking her, and she's coming out of you to heal and clear the space. And she started showing me about energy in a totally different way. And this was kind of, it was kind of woven into my madness at the time, I want to say. Like, I was in a state of like just like breaking free of everything in a really difficult way, and she sort of was keeping me safe during that and letting me like go wild, but like within her arms, you know. And wasn't a really, like, my first real like physical outside of my body like calling experience was I was with had a really abusive relationship for 2 years with this like white man. And it's funny because we talk a lot about black and brown people being like violent and, you know, being rapists and like a lot of these things, but the actuality is that a lot of the violence I've endured is by white people and white men. And this one person, like, he pretty much like changed the course of my life. I mean, I don't want to surrender my power in that sense, but just to show the gravity of what I felt, and that's how I felt for a real long time. He just shifted my path a lot, and I realized I was playing out some intergenerational trauma with like the jihadi sisters and the ships and like white men kind of like taking us, and like our families not really knowing what to do with that, or not having a family, or kind of being lost in this chaos, and then like a white person plucks you up out of it, because a lot of people were really poor and illiterate, and that's how they ended up on the ships, not because they deserved that, but because white people came and like took advantage of that situation.
I mean, the idea of a white knight or white savior today, of, you know, people who go do missions in other countries, whether it's around like healthcare or anything like that, like that's still an idea that lives strong today, that stems from exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just don't understand why you don't donate. Like, why are you putting your face out there? Like, these little kids are now going to look up to you when they could be looking up to people in their community, you know? And I do speak that to, like, the tons of white people that I've met that are always like, I'm going to, like, you know, El Salvador, where I'm going to do it. It's like, no, just send money so that people there can have jobs and build the libraries that you're talking about in the schools. So, yeah, I guess that in that sense, that was this like white savior sort of thing. Is that I had like a really difficult upbringing. I mean, like I feel like we all share that, because we come from a traumatized people. Like, I didn't realize that at that time. Like, my family's acting from a place of trauma and pain, and they're not meaning to be this way, and that they actually also need healing and support. And so coming out of that, I was just trying to get away from them, and I went into like a way more intense world. And it was replaying that trauma. It was like this white man taking me into this space and me being like, oh, maybe things are gonna be better now. And him being so much older than me and like having a knowledge of the world in a way I didn't, you know? And I remember we actually broke up because one of my friends like scrawled like his name and his like door number onto his front door on the Upper East Side. Like, and there was like this, I felt like she was imbued with Shakti, like that she had done it because she was actually like saving my life. Like, you know, like she knew that I got hit that day and she like really did something about it, you know? And she was like, I know something's been going on. I don't know how else to do this, but we're gonna just do that. She wrote that he sells drugs, and she just did it. Like, she just didn't care. She just like went for it, and he like cut me out of his life. And it was like a life-saving moment. And in that way, she was imbued, right? She had, like, I think that Ma had stepped in and was like, I'm gonna literally use a body for you to do this. And of course, some time had went by, and I was still in this sort of like middle space. We hadn't seen each other for 2 years, and I went to go see him, and we're sitting there, and I was just trying to see the humanity in him. I had like started to want to like stop seeing him as like this beast, this demon, like, and erase this like part of my life. And I'm sitting here trying to have an interaction, and he starts with something. I don't know what it was, something really frustrating. And his whole entire cabinet, I had given him a picture of Kali. Even before all that, I had known about her in that way so deeply. Given her a picture, it was hanging still underneath this cabinet. The whole entire cabinet and all the glasses fell out.
No way.
Yes, and he had to go really quickly to hold it up. He was standing there. He's like, help me. And I was like, I have to go. And then like, her picture fell. I grabbed the picture and I just ran out of there.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow, like, she moves things. Like, she is the force that we need when we're going through difficult stuff, you know? And sometimes we are going through so many difficult things, and like, we don't feel like we have anywhere to say it, you know? And she taught me, she was like, she could feel that I felt ashamed about the trauma that I was going through, that I felt ashamed about not following the path my parents wanted for me, or, you know, the things that I had gotten myself like mixed up in, you know, like, that she was like, you don't have to feel ashamed of that. Like, a lot of people go through that and they're just not showing it. And some people went through those things by force, and you're replaying a lot of trauma, from your ancestors. And it just has gone unfolding in that way with her. She continues to show me that and to not shame my really intense experiences.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to ask, I really, again, say thank you for sharing your relationship with Kali. Do you think that anyone has the ability to build a relationship with a deity in that way?
Yeah, I think her type of work is special in the sense that, I pray to all the goddesses and I respect everyone's spirituality and religion, so I honor everyone's traditions and would pray to their gods too in their space. I do a lot of healing circles with people who work with Mayan or Aztec goddesses, and I honor them when they're there in my space and in prayer. But I would say not everyone connects to Kali the same way, but I think it's possible to call upon her. I can't really speak on, I'm not an authority on that. I feel like I don't have the right to speak on whether or not it's okay, especially since I tend to have a lot of white people hit me up on Instagram that are like, Kali is in my life, and I'm like, most likely because you're talking to me, but you might be feeling it off of people, even the Sri Shakti Mariamman temple that's around here, there's this temple and they have all this Ma presence there. It's people around it are going to feel that. You may not know that's what you're feeling, so you're just Kali's coming to me, but it's yeah, Kali's coming to somebody, and you're sensing her because she's so big. But other deities, I would say yes. I think that everyone has guides and angels and however you see them and connect to them, ancestors. Everyone has ancestors, higher vibrational beings. People that have that take on a yogic or tantric practices have ascended masters. So bodhisattvas, if you are a Buddhist, and there are practices that teach you about that, definitely, that there are beings watching over us. Not just the deities and the gods, but middle people that have lived here and chose the path to aid us in our evolution.
So I want to go back and talk about something that you mentioned earlier, where you just needed to leave your family's home to go through your own shit by yourself, and while they're also going through their own baggage. And I think that that's something that a lot of people in the Indo-Caribbean community can relate to, where especially if you're trying to do something like build a business or go out and find what success is for you. Sometimes you do need to separate yourself and compartmentalize what those experiences are. Can you talk about how leaving in that experience relates directly to you going out and working with other people? How were you able to, can you just talk a little bit more about how you were able to find your strength from those experiences of separating yourself?
I think one of the things was that I became aware of this much later though, so it wasn't happening consciously at the moment, but I feel just I was working with my feelings and intuition a lot. And I think that's number one, is just trusting yourself when you start your journey out into the world away from your family, that there will be the number one thing is your guilt and shame. You're gonna be I'm leaving everyone, Nani's gonna be mad at me, this whole thing. And you're gonna feel that pull and push, and it's okay to feel that. Discomfort is part of the transition out of certain spaces. And some people return, and when you return, you have so much to offer everyone, and that's important to remember too. But in terms of how I was able to do it, and what was happening once I started was that, my family, they were educated about feminism, right? I think that's where it kind of started, with sociology and feminism and anthropology. Going to classes and realizing that there are ways to think about the things that we were all experiencing. Mm-hmm. I was there are words to this, there are books about this. I'm pissed. The lots of anger started coming out. And at first it would have been totally directed at my parents, and it partly was, but it was kind of good to be away a little bit, to have that anger, because you don't want to turn around and just yell at them for not knowing, because the reason why they don't know is the same things you're reading about, how that all came about, how colonialism, imperialism, and colorism affected us, and I think it also allowed me to break free of judgment from my family, the judgment that they got from their parents, and their parents got from their parents, and their parents probably got from white people. And it's that ongoing judgment, or even just the caste system. Let's even talk without colonialism, just the caste systems, that were that kind of thinking of like some people are different than other people in a bad way mentality. Like a lot of that could shift out of the way without your parents like watching what you're doing and you reporting literally everything. Like I remember being 10 years old and my parents being like, you're not allowed to have a diary, give me that. And I'm like, what? But also I was raised by Scorpios, so they really don't believe in secrets. So I just think that there's some sense of connecting with people that you wouldn't necessarily find, people and information that you wouldn't get from your family. And if it makes you feel bad, just sort of thinking it as in the way of you're gathering stuff for them.
Absolutely. You know? And I mean, I can totally relate to your experience of going to college and just being able to now develop this vocabulary around how to talk about your history and more of awareness around all of the things that impacted your experience just as a human being today because of all of that heritage. And it's also really powerful to be able to then share that knowledge with your community and with your family. I remember I think my sister and I had similar experiences, but coming back home and getting advice with my parents and them just being like, you're just using big words. But it makes you so much more understanding. And I think that's really valuable. So one thing that you mentioned that you do as part of your practice just now is a healing circle. What is that?
So I want to say one more thing before we move on to that, but just about, because I've been thinking a lot about this too, because I didn't finish college, and I've been thinking about like the intellectualism and like the kind of the way that I separated myself when I did learn all those things. I did come back home and was like, well, let me tell you this whole like spiel on how I really need to be treated and you should be treated too. And then they're like, wow, yeah, my parents are like, they think just because you talk fancy, like we're gonna, all of a sudden change and this is not how it works. People are learning things all over the place, nothing's different, and how to communicate that. And I think now in my life, I'm trying to understand that, like, how to bring this is information back in without the institutionalized, especially the white institutionalized lens of like, I am smarter than you now, but like actually rein it back in and find the balance of like, how can I make this information accessible? And that's what I was saying before about privilege, like whether it's class privilege or color or whatever it is, whatever privilege you have, like you go into the space, you gather this stuff, you bring it back to your community, you're like, this is what they're teaching us out here, know? And sort of like learning how to do that now, even though I was just, at first. And I also wanted to add art and how important like music and art and creativity was part of like leaving my family, because my family, they're all creative people. My dad like definitely is a musician and a creative person, not allowed to do that because of having to work and do what he does here. And I noticed that like that wasn't something nurtured a lot in our communities. Like unless you're singing bhajans at like you're not gonna be like an artist. You're not inspired to like. And creativity helps everything. Like if you want to start your own business, if you want to whatever you want to do, if you're making art in some way, you learn from it how to break free of the molds of how somebody was doing it in a way that doesn't even fit you. You learn a lot about yourself. So I think that like that was one of the things that. And something I think I would offer or encourage people to do that are taking that path and moving away from their family for a little bit. It's like use that time also to not just party, but like to do art and like to find things that you wouldn't do in that space.
To explore yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. And so the healing circle, that's also a thing that's like developing with me. It's like I use that term because it's the term that's being used and it's the one that I feel like other people will understand. It just basically means that a group of people come together, we have set intentions, or we're working with a moon phase, or we're working with a deity or a holy day, and we're setting our intentions and transmuting our energy together. And I have different versions of that. So one would be like womb health. And I noticed that a lot of like South Asian and Indo-Caribbean people, West Indian people have PCOS and endometriosis. And also a lot of issues with like miscarriages and like abortion aftercare or even talking about those things. We don't really have enough of that. Not just in our community, just in general, just in the world. I mean, you can see that with the way that abortion's being treated. We're not educated about the just basics of it, so how are we even going to know about the emotional aspect and the spiritual aspects of these things? So I started doing moon circles and womb circles. So we have people come together of all genders, but if you have a womb, and if you don't have a womb, we have astral wombs, right? So I talked about this a little bit. And I'm not going to go too deep into it right now because it is a really big topic.
Yeah.
But astral womb is a space in which we live in and we experience ourselves as our child self in that space energetically and spiritually. So our pain body exists in there where we store all of our trauma and our intergenerational trauma and the stuff that people put on us. So like if you're an energetic person, an empathic person, a sensitive person, your astral womb, even if you don't have a physical one, becomes full of other people's stuff. Okay, and it needs clearing and cleansing and attention, just as much as our physical one does. So it's really open to any genders, but I generally attract more people with physical wombs that want to talk about and connect to that space inside of them because it holds a lot of pain. And it's also the sacral chakra center, so it's about our creativity and our sensuality, which we hide a lot of. Like, what does it mean to be sexy outside of the norms of a culture or this society that deems only certain bodies and experiences, or, you know, that's ableist and all these things that don't allow for you, you know, queer phobia and fat phobia and all these things that don't allow for you to express your sexuality as though it were unsafe or obscene. You know, so that all happens in that space. It's kind of really intimate, and there's a lot of feelings and tears and collective healing. And part of my mission with that is talking to people about normalizing how much we support each other. Like, part of my mission in my work is to, like I was saying, like, I can't make a living off of this, but like when I dream of that, like, and what I want to be paid for is not the healing work, it's like my time and labor, and normalizing payment and, you know, compensation for emotional labor and psychic labor. We all do it, like, even if you're not a psychic and you're not a healer and you're not labeled in that regard, everyone's doing it, and especially femmes, especially queer folks, especially people of color. We're like constant labor. You know, even like when we talk about our homes, like femmes and women in the home, tons of labor for men. Like, it's just a lot of labor, no compensation or acknowledgement of this. So part of the circles is to acknowledge that we're here to support each other, to not feel, because sometimes often what comes up is the frustration of one person going through something that now we all have to deal with. But it's like, no, we're a community. We chose this, you know, knowing chosen. But that we're all going to take turns. Someone's going to purge, everyone's going to hold space. Another person purges, everyone holds space. That it's not just one person every time, you know. So I try to encourage people to keep coming to them so that they can build that community.
Okay, great. So earlier you mentioned that you are practicing Hindu, right? How is that a part of your business? I mean, looking at other new age spirituality businesses, yes, you might see an Om symbol, you know, posted up somewhere on a tattoo, more famously, but you'll see little parts of Hinduism that are incorporated in their businesses, but not necessarily as an actual religion incorporated into the way that they offer their services. Can you talk about how Hinduism is incorporated into your business?
Yeah, so Hinduism is like the foundation in a way, even though I said I started with tarot. Hinduism, when I was little, like my parents just teaching me, my mom, like I remember, like when you're a little kid, you hear like count sheep or something. But when I was little, my mom was just always saying, like, when you're trying to go to sleep, say Om Namah Shivaya, like over and over again to go to sleep. So I look back at that now and go, wow, like you're really preparing me in a way to ease my mind, because that is the mantra of meditation. It does bring you to that space.
My mom is gonna love that you just said that.
Yeah, and it's like, and I like, you know, my mom's not like a hyper spiritual or religious. She's not hyper religious. She's spiritual. But we were raised in a house where there was a dandi like every year, and like, you know, my dad did like kirtan at home sometimes. When he was in Guyana, he did a lot of kirtan. So like him and his brothers and his dad would always like sing at home, and they taught us bhajans and they taught us mantras. At the time, I wasn't even thinking about it that way. You know, like these are mantras that I'm gonna use in a more, now I feel like in a more tantric way, in a more meditational way. And the way that it facilitates my work is that it gives me the energy and the support for myself. Like going back to what I said at the beginning, is that my practice and my work are coexisting, because I can't show anyone anything until I'm learning it and opening it in myself. So in that sense, like my Hindu practices facilitate and support my energy to be at the place to do the work, you know. Sometimes I do teach mantras to other people, like very simple ones, just like Ganesh and Shiva. Occasionally I'll teach Kali, but very, very rarely, because I don't feel like I want to share that with just like random people, especially like non-South Asian, non-Madrasi people, just because it's so delicate and deserves that respect, you know. But the mantras that are already being used by white people, like I totally am like all over it, because I'm like, no, I'm here. Mm-hmm. Don't worry, you don't have to do a stand-in for us. We're coming in, like, you know. And there's actually this woman named Tejal who does. She has an Instagram called ABCD Yogi, and she's talking a lot on there about white people appropriating yoga and like how to reconnect us into those spaces, you know, and even like other spaces too, like sadhana. I don't know if you know them, but sadhana, I think they're called the space for progressive Hindus. They're also like doing the same thing where they're being inclusive in the sense that they're like, okay, white people can come, but it's like it's really still centering, you know, us and like our practices and staying like reclaiming that space. Jahaji sisters too, doing like the work that they're doing, and I think that like Hinduism hasn't just been a spiritual religious thing to me in a long time. I think that was the transition once I took it's like I broke away from it, but when I reconnected without all the toxicity of the patriarchy and colorism and like the everyone is Brahmin thing, which like I was just like, this doesn't feel right, you know? Yeah. It doesn't seem true, like, you know? And in that sense, like I'm looking at it as sort of like part of my culture more, and that keeps me connected to my family when I'm doing this practice. So I don't go like because this world of healing and inside of the New Age experience, it really does threaten to like pull you away from everyone and like throw you in there and see what can happen, you know. And like Hinduism kind of keeps me grounded. What I know, right, and the way that I know it keeps me grounded.
That makes sense, yeah. And just for our listeners, I mean, you know, being Indo-Caribbean, Hinduism, whether you practice it or not, is something that I think all Indo-Caribbeans are familiar with at least. But I just want to spend a couple minutes just talking about vocabulary. What does a mantra mean? Like, what is that? What does it mean?
So a mantra is just basically a chant that you use to invoke an energy from a deity or a chakra, and you just chant it over and over again. So like Om Ganapate Namaha, it would be a mantra, and then you would say it over and over again. That's what you use the malas for. They have 108 beads, and you chant it into each bead to seed it into the mala itself, and then it starts to collect the energy of that. And so you can keep one for every particular deity. And I noticed that like growing up that we always had malas, but I never saw people chanting on them. And that also goes back to like what I said about Madrasi people like being the holders of these secrets. It's like even if we were losing like touch a little bit with like what was going on, there was still this like people are still holding on to the tools, you know, they still have them, so that when we come back to it, we realize what that's for. We're like, oh, that's what that does, you know. Some mantras that I work with in my classes are the beach mantras, which are for the chakras. They're the very simple ones. They're like Om, but they're for each, they're different words. So Ham for the throat, it would sound like and you would just chant that over and over again to seed it into your chakra itself, to open it for your truth, for your expression, whatever that space is associated with, and for your organs. So I've been learning a lot about mantras in the sense that like it helps you to heal your body too, not just, you know. And that's kind of one of the things we lost in our practices, was that these mantras, like the bhajans are bhakti, right? Like there's 3 forms of yoga. It's like the bhakti part of it, the asana, the movement, and then like the chanting, you know, and it's the pranayama, the breathing, because chanting also helps you with your breath, right? It helps you bring your blood to different parts of your body and makes you healthier. And so these mantras that your breath plus the energy of that goddess or god or energy, you know. And during the time that we lost it, we kept the bhajans, we kept the songs because they seemed, I think probably to the colonizers, it seemed like that was just like song and dance. It's not anything. It's the only way we could save it, you know. Right. But like our deep, like energetic practices that would look scary to them, because when we start like levitating and like imbued with energy, and we're like a skinny little person is lifting up like a whole tree or something, they're gonna be like, but we can do that because of what mantras do. They imbue you further with energy.
And so chakra is a really popular term, not just in Hinduism, but what does that mean?
So chakras are the energy space inside the spine. They're astral as well. They're auric. They're outside the body and they're inside the body. And they store energies in different parts of our systems, right? So we have the root, the sacral, the solar, the heart, the throat, and the third eye, and the crown. And each chakra has an association with that, an energy system and an emotional self. Like I was saying, for the throat, for instance, it's associated with your truth, with the intellect, with expressing yourself. But it's also associated with the thyroid. And you could chant certain mantras, like there's like different Shiva and Nandi mantras that you could chant for your thyroid to relieve tension in that space. And even hum, like the beach mantra, is really good for like opening up that space, even if you're like a singer, for instance, and you're just trying to channel that energy better from that space. So chakras are a space that we connect to the emotional, physical, and astral bodies.
Cool. And there's one more word I want to ask about, but before that, you know, it sounds like hearing you talk about the chakras, it sounds like there are potentially a lot of similarities with how you can use mantras to focus on specific areas of your body in similar ways that someone might use Reiki. Mm-hmm. Do you find yourself comparing the two practices? Like, how do you sort of reconcile the two? How do you use them together? What is that like?
Reiki has become like so much more mysterious to me because I feel like I needed Reiki to open up, and then now what I do is like, it feels tantric, you know. It feels like it's based in Hinduism and Buddhism. It doesn't feel entirely like Reiki anymore. I honor that practice because of its own heritage and like that it's not part of my own. And so I always talk about it and name it and communicate about it because I think that's completely important as well. But when I practice, I am chanting mantras into people, and sometimes it's silently, so they might not hear it. Sometimes it is out loud, and I always let people know in session. I'm like, you may hear like bells, there might be smoke filled in here because I'm lighting like camphor, like, you know, it all goes down. I'll do a whole puja on somebody if I feel that they're imbued with a goddess. Like, I'll do a whole thing, and their eyes are closed for the whole thing, so they may not even know it, but like I'm on the floor, I'm like praying to them. Like, I feel that I touch upon the energy in people, and I use the practices that I know most of all to work with. So Hinduism definitely comes in their mantras, and chanting the mantras, like connecting to the chakras, like all those things, you know. And even when you do read like new agey books, like Reiki does seem really open, and they will like kind of mush together all the practices and all the POC they've gathered from. So they do that as well, but I do it in the sense that like I'm trying to stay true to what I know and what feels natural. It's a really intuitive experience. Like, sometimes I'll work on somebody really close to me, and they work with a deity that's not Hindu. They'll work with their own deity, and that deity will come out anyway and ask for certain service or offering or experience. And like, because of my practices in Hinduism, I learned how to be devotional, you know. So in that sense, it does help. And I don't know if like I compare them. I feel like I'm trying to carve out. I call it Shakti Reiki now because I'm trying to be more true to it, but I still am learning what is it that I'm doing, because it feels like I haven't met the people who can tell me what this is yet, you know? And it is probably not something you can just read in a book.
So I said one more word, but actually now I have two. Shakti and Tantra or Tantric. Whichever one you want to address first.
So Shakti. Shakti is the divine energy of all things. It's also the primordial goddess. It's also Kali, Durga, you know, Saraswati, Lakshmi. They're all Shakti. They're all the divine energy. So we say that there's like a consort, a partner, you know, that each goddess is in a relationship. But really what it is two energies that fit together, and one of them, and specifically I'll talk about what I work with because I work with Shiva Shakti. So Shiva is the corpse, and then Shakti is the energy which enlivens the corpse. So Shakti is the energy that enlivens everything around us. You know, I like to think about it as like, you know, we have like these sayings that we pass on to each other, like, I don't know, like never kick a gift horse in the mouth. I don't even know what that means. But like, let's say you keep saying that. You're saying it in this term of Shiva, right?
Yeah.
So you don't know what it means. It's just the corpse. But one day you might get it, and when you do get it, and you have an emotional connection and an experience that like enlivens it, that's the Shakti in it, right? Shakti is, you know, also the Kundalini energy. So when we're I guess we could do this to segue into what Tantra is. But in Tantra, that we work with Kundalini energy, and that's the energy in the spine that helps us to self-realize. And the way that we're self-realizing with it is that it moves slowly up the spine, clearing each chakra and each space to, and if you want to think about it, it's almost like from child self to enlightened self. So the child self is in the root. And so as the Kundalini rises, the Shakti rises, it eliminates the clutters and the layers of trauma and things that needs to be moved, the karma banks then, right? Like the little tubes of karma we have in there. So it's clearing them. So that's Shakti as well. And I think maybe it's not called Shakti in like more white-led practices because they're not aware, I think, of how we all have that. They think it's just something you have to like sit with, and they're training themselves to do something that I think a lot of us have just from singing bhajans, that we're already raising Shakti. You know, it's why it gets really hot in the room. That's Shakti. You know?
Yeah, I've passed out plenty
of
times.
Yeah, that's real because your Shakti is rising, you know? And so in terms of Tantra, there's a lot of debate on what that means. In the West, obviously, people just associate it with like tantric sex.
It's just Sex in the City.
Yeah, I know, it's so terrible. Like, why? And it's like cheapened it and like stripped it down to like this like a sexual thing. And not that sex at any point is like stripped down and like not the thing that it's about, because it is about sexual energy. Kundalini, Shakti, all of that is sexual energy. And it can be used for that. And there is that aspect of the practice, but it really isn't about another person at all. It's about your own energy. And when I say that there's a lot of debate about it, it's because I'm not like a tantric scholar. I'm not like an old school yogi. A lot of men have their own ideas and their own teachings that they pass on. But for me, Tantra is the study that we have for ourselves, the research that we're all our little own scientists experiencing and researching energy. Okay, and Tantra is the research of our own energy and how we can use that energy and channel that energy with different spiritual practices to enlighten ourselves, to lift our vibration into the next experience of humanity. So it includes, like I said, like in yogic practices, the pranayama, the breath, chanting and mantras, and also bhakti, which is like just devotional practices like bhajans and like singing and connecting to music and art, you know. So I remember reading about tantric painting, which is just like a person literally is channeling the energy in their body to a point, to a fine point through practices, and then using their hand and then the brush to like make very simple movements over a very long period of time. And that was a practice that was passed on family to family. So it wasn't just like yogis doing tantra. It was like people that are like probably our ancestors, you know, practicing this experience of energetic work. And I think it's probably the most primordial and potent aspect of Hinduism and Buddhism, which is why it's not really allowed and we haven't been connecting to it as much, because it enlivens us and it makes us free from the control of capitalism and colonialism, because it frees our mind.
Right. It's funny hearing you talk about that, because I am immediately taken back to like the idea of flow in psychology and being able to like be so engaged in something that you know, don't even realize that you're spending so much time on it, or you don't even realize how engaged you are. But it's funny to me and how separated those ideas or concepts will always probably be because of exactly what you just said. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think that you have you bring a lot of value to your practice, not just because of how you go about your practice, but because of the knowledge that you bring in terms of feminism, gender issues, and also just your understanding of the historical context behind your own experience in our broader culture. But with that, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I think that, well, I guess maybe just that for everyone to be more interested in the things that lurk in their feelings, like their intuition, because we are intuitively guided to spaces, and I think right now a lot of people are going through an awakening, and white people are out here talking about it with each other. They really are. They're supporting each other, they're telling each other it's okay to be weird, and we need to do that. It's time for us to do that, because they're advancing with our practices while we're saying like that's not the way to be, or that's not normal, or I don't have time for that, or I don't know what that is. And it's like we really do need to reclaim that space, and it can start really simply. It doesn't have to be a whole entire yogic practice. It can just be like allowing yourself, and just at that. I'm not even gonna say allowing yourself to do what, but just allowing yourself.
Absolutely. Great. So where can people find your business, yourself, Kalima, Triple Goddess Tarot, online or in person?
So my website is triplegoddesstarotandhealing.com, and my Instagram is at triplegoddesstarot, and my Instagram is just so that you can like communicate with me, but I'm more on there like doing like dance videos lately and trying not to get too serious with my practice, because that's also a lesson that I'm learning. And my email is advice.kali@gmail.com.
Great. Well, thank you again, and thanks for checking out this episode of Figuring It Out at the Figure Studio.